Welcome to Fast Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for preachers and lovers of Hebrew Bible everywhere in the world. My name is Paul Esser, and I have my other co-host here.
I'm Rachel Wren. I teach biblical studies at Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University.
I'm Tim McNish. And I teach at Christian Theological Seminary.
I'm Rosie Candleplow. I teach the Bible at Wake Forest.
You teach the Bible. You teach
the whole Bible.
You teach that Bible.
Teach the Bible.
We have preaching tips from Micah 5. We're going to go through maybe 5a, verse 1 through 5a, thereabout. But this is Advent 5 or 4, Advent 4. This is Advent 4.
Or 5.
Or 5.
If you want.
Can I hear 6?
Advent 6.
We're devolving.
We're going to do a little bit of background here, right, to the Micah passage. And for preachers, if you don't remember what the Micah passage is the famous one about, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are one of the little clans of Judah. From you shall come forth for me one who is to rule Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient of days, right? So that's the passage we're going to talk about today. And a little bit of a context, which I think the text itself sort of alludes to, right? So verse 1, there is a small language about like, now you are walled around with the wall. Like that's, the Hebrew is really weird here. And there's a language about sage laying against us. And then if you skim down a little bit to, I think, 5, there's a reference to the Assyrians, right? So if the Assyrians come into our land and threat upon our soil, we will rise against them, 7 shepherds and blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on, right? So the text itself kind of alludes to the historical, context a little bit here. And just to remind preachers here, we are in the 8th century, right? This is one of the prophets of the 8th century, including like Amos and Hosea and some portions of Isaiah too, right? And this is a turbulent time in ancient Israel at the time, right? There's a lot of internal turmoil, but also international, conflicts and things like that. And according to a lot of the prophets of the 8th century, I think the internal things, the internal corruption and injustice caused the international conflict, and God actually allowed the Assyrians to attack northern Israel, Samaria, particularly because of the failure of leadership at the time. And so there's a lot of reference to like injustice and corruption and religious apostasy and things like that, right? Throughout all of the 8th century prophets, but most especially in Micah. So I think the reference to Assyria is probably a reference to one of those attacks, probably, right? And it's in the context of all of that warfare that Micah speaks.
Well, it's interesting because I'm just thinking about this, the sort of like geopolitical reality that you described. In light of your own work with migration and the Bible, like this is the kind of context that gives rise to forced migration, right? So does this, like when you read this, is it very familiar? In terms
it
of,
is super familiar.
Know what's going to happen?
The forced displacement and forced deportation, precisely at this time in this context. Northern Israel is already being attacked and they're already gone, right? Or we're maybe close to being gone, but southern is like Judah is pretty intact, although it's kind of shaky too. Because
Micah's speaking to Judah, right?
Micah's speaking to Judah, right? So let's get into the prophecy itself, right? What Micah actually says here. And it starts in 2, but you, O Bethlehem of Ephratah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, and it goes on and then promises a new king in verse 4. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall live secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be one of peace. Right? It's so like cool. So, the contrast between failing leadership in Israel, which caused all of these attacks internationally, versus what God is going to do now, right, in Israel, like raising a new leader who's going to stand and feed, and is peace is going to be his goal, the big word shalom, wholeness and completeness. which I think includes like tzedek, like, righteousness and justice and all of that, right? The promise of a better king, a new ruler who's going to change the circumstance in ancient Israel at the time. I think it's filled with a lot of hope. I think it's filled with a lot of hope.
Why do you think the prophet focuses on Bethlehem?
I think the interesting thing about Bethlehem here, right? It's like, and again, the description sort of gives it away too a little bit in that there is something about David, right? And the dynasty of David and the connection with the covenant that God made with David and the understanding that, God, all the great kings are kind of Davidic, right? Reference in 2 Samuel 7. The kind of promise that God gives to the house of David that, like, all the kings are basically going to come through your lineage. Kings come from. Right? So.
But also the way that it's describing the greatness of the Davidic lineage here is by appealing to the part of David's
legacy.
Well, the legacy of David, the part of his legacy that is least impressive.
Right.
That he's from Bethlehem, one of the littlest in Judah.
Yes.
And to me, that says something about, in the geopolitical moment where Judah is, their northern neighbor Israel is bigger, it's stronger, it's more stable, and they're, trying to fend off Assyria, but they're not going to be able to.
Yeah.
What chance does Judah have?
Yeah.
And here the prophet says, but you remember our greatest king ever, right? He came from Bethlehem.
Yeah.
From this little, they could have said like, you, Jerusalem, the capital of the kingdom from you. But no, it's you, Bethlehem of Judah.
You podunk middle of nowhere.
So there's a kind of underdog scene here that despite Judah's vulnerability in their moment, yet God does great things out of vulnerable little places like Bethlehem. So that, I think, is that part of that message of hope that you're talking about, Paul.
Which could preach really beautifully.
Exactly.
The vulnerability piece, like that's what God actually seeks from us, not power, not wealth, not prestige, but a willingness to bring forth like a woman in labor, in verse 3. So,
and I think that's a preaching point that I would offer here too, because I think it would work very well in the Advent context too, as we're speaking, that the idea that God is able to uplift and empower from the least of all and make greatness out of that thing. I think that's such an inspiring tone, right? It preaches well, and it's like it's preacher friendly.
Yeah.
But what does it mean also, like, for the Messiah to come from a lowly, insignificant place as Bethlehem? And I know I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, which is because I'm thinking about Matthew here, right? Because Matthew references Micah in Matthew chapter 2, verse 6. And although in the specific historical context, Micah is speaking of this new leader, unnamed. We don't even know what the name is. Right. We can make guesses. Maybe Hezekiah, maybe Jotham. We don't know, right? But is making a specific promise to a specific 8th century geopolitical context, right?
Yeah.
Matthew picks up that same language, quotes the exact same passage, O Bethlehem of Ephratah, from you shall come this great ruler, and applies this to Jesus' identity and mission.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, Matthew allows us to extend, maybe not the meaning, but like extend the relevance of the prophecy a little bit outside of its social political context, right? And especially aligns it with Jesus' identity and mission, such that when we read it in the New Testament, we're able to say, oh, this is exactly what Jesus is doing, right? Or similar to what Jesus is doing in our context here, right? And I think that's one of the ways that preachers can, maybe think about this passage in the preaching context, and think about how the mission of justice and the mission of leading with peace and wholeness and shalom, right, aligns with Jesus' mission and what that means for the coming of the Messiah this Advent season.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
we've been focusing so much on like the figure of this ruler in Israel that what I think is really interesting is our combination of passages here really seems to highlight the woman in verse 3, right?
Yeah.
You shall give them up until the time when she who was in labor has brought forth. Now, that verse can just kind of be read over, but then our other readings this week are the Magnificat, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, then what that does is that you might focus on this ruler that is to come, but then we are given an invitation to look again at Mary and her waiting, right?
Yes.
And in her waiting, a symbolic waiting of us all as, this kind of, and the reality of birth in the ancient world and in this time is one of danger and a fraught time, a time when all kinds of disasters are possible in the midst of such hope of a new child, right? And so, I mean, there's some tension there, the war and the peace. It's the idea that even in the midst of war comes this prophecy that one like this ruler will bring peace, right? So I don't know. I like holding the tension, reminding folks that these prophets are speaking. Part of the reason why we're remembering them is because they were saying things that were unusual, memorable, because they did not fit the kind of maybe the dominant script of the 8th century. Like the idea that this verse 4 is saying they shall live secure.
Yeah.
They've never lived secure.
They've never.
And the idea of security in the 8th century, it's something that many of us work hard to try to secure, but there's this essential helplessness to live secure.
It's part of the audacity of the prophet. Like in that sort of context, to talk about security and hope coming from such vulnerability.
Back to that word again.
It's interesting how in all the texts that we read for Christmas and Advent, especially Christmas, we hear the theme of birth and labor and, femininity and things like that. And here I think Micah is also, using that same language as you referenced, Rosie, but pointing to the relief after birth.
Yeah, right. Right. Like, spoken as someone with a 7-month-old who remembers
it's like the relief. It says, when she who is in labor has brought forth.
Yeah, right. Ooh, yeah, lovely.
That's lovely, Finally, we're here.
Yeah.
Finally. And this is what it's going to be like once we are there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosie, for bringing that up like that. I think this is a wonderful place to call it a session. Preachers, we hope that you got a lot out of this discussion here today. As we always refer you to, visit our website, firstreadingpodcast.com, for a backlog of hundreds of various episodes of practically everything that has ever featured in the lectionary. And reach out to us, send us a comment, send us a like, send us a review on wherever you hear of us, Facebook, social media, wherever. And until next time, my name is Paul S.
And I'm Rachel Wren.
I'm Tim McNinch.
And I'm Rosie Campbell.
Happy preaching.